Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Liam's Hockey. Thanks very much for joining us here on Thursday night, March the 26th, as we keep our little run going here from this week. And I think tomorrow, being Friday, and not sure, as I said earlier, if I'm going to continue and do them over on Saturday and Sunday or not. I may very well, but in the event that I don't, regardless, hope to continue them next week anyway. But I think tomorrow, as I post these on social media a little bit later, that I'll see if any of you have any questions. Not so much hockey trivia. I mean, if you do, that's great. But maybe name a favorite player you had growing up, or a question on anything, any topic on hockey that you'd like me to take a rip at. I'd be happy to include it in tomorrow night's little taping that we do here. And, you know, in addition to maybe a couple other tidbits of information on the particular date. And, of course, our memorials, which are staying popular. And I continue to say this. I've really only solicited on Twitter so far for names, and there's been no shortage. And I've got three beauties again tonight. And for the second time this week, very proud to say, we'll be remembering a man who immigrated to Canada in 1959. So we'll have that for you a little bit later, of course, with my very dear friend, Mr. Jameson's Irish Whiskey. He'll be along a little bit later. So on this date, really only a couple of things that I want to talk about. I'm taking some creative liberty tonight, and I'll get there in just a moment. But Tim Horton played his first game ever in the NHL on this date in 1950. Now, some of you probably know, but most of you probably don't, that Tim isn't his real name. He was Miles Horton. Miles Gilbert Horton. Tim became a nickname within the family. It obviously stuck. Tim didn't like the name Miles. I believe it was named after a family member, if I'm not mistaken. I may have to double check that. But regardless, everyone will for always know him as Tim. And as you go and get your double-double and your favorite donut or muffin in the morning or anything else, it's been an institution definitely here in Canada for decades. I think he opened the first one in 63-ish or so. But Miles Gilbert Horton, a.k.a. Tim Horton, played his first game in the NHL for the Toronto Maple Leafs. They lost to the New York Rangers 5-3, and he was not wearing the number that he would make famous, which was number 7. He was wearing number 26 in that first game. He did not record any points, but he did get a penalty. He was incredibly physical, and I want to just talk just a little bit more about him because when I wrote my second book, I was assembling my questions, and 2 years before that, my second book came out in 2001, and in 1999, I traveled across Canada on as a gig with Labatt's, courtesy of Ken Craig, good friend of mine here in Ottawa, known to many, concert promoter extraordinaire. At this particular time, he had been hired by Labatt's to source out a gig, and I got hired as part of the entertainment to go across Canada and work in all these bars as part of the Sportsnet Game of the Week, which was on Tuesday nights in those days. This is in 1999. And we were in Halifax. I don't know if anybody watching this is familiar with the city of Halifax. If you are, you probably are familiar with the Midtown Tavern. I mean, it's got to be one of the legendary taverns in the country. At that time, I believe it was owned still by Doug Grant, who I believe has passed away. But I was in there in 1999, and Larry Murphy had just passed Tim Horton for the most games played in NHL history. Now, Larry still sits currently third on the list. Tim is down to ninth, with I believe 1,445. Larry's over 1,600. Chris Chelios is number one, I think around 1,665-ish, give or take one or two. And Tim still remarkably sits at number 9. So this particular night in 1999, the gentleman asked me, because Larry had just passed Tim. Tim had been dead 15 years. He died in that car accident driving the Pantera, as we all know, going from Toronto back to Buffalo. Tragic accident in February of 74, I believe it was, and that was the end of his life. And 15 years later, 25 years later, Larry Murphy passes him, and the irony is Larry Murphy played with 5 guys that Tim Horton played with. That was the question the guy asked me at the Midtown in 1999. It was a remarkable hockey trivia question. I got 3 out of the 5, could not get the final 2. Rick Martin, Gary Unger, Jim Rutherford, Don Luce, and Jerry Korab. Sorry if I spoiled it for anybody who was putting their thinking caps on, but I got 3 out of the 5 and stewed for about 20 minutes over the other 2. Couldn't get them when he told me that, wow, what a beauty question. So I put it in the book, and it's in the book. And a bit moot point now to a degree, obviously, with Larry, I think, around 3rd, and Tim down to 9th. I know he maintains that 9th position for games played by defensemen, which I think is absolutely remarkable. He finished with about a plus 198 in his career. The other interesting thing about Tim, this is one of those outlier moments statistically in hockey we see periodically. In 1962, when the Leafs won the Cup, he's a 4-time Cup winner with the Leafs, 62, 63, 64, and 67. And in 1962, he recorded 16 points in the playoffs. He led the Leafs in scoring in the playoffs. He had more points than Dave Keon, Frank Mahovlich, Red Kelly, Bob Pulford, anybody. And that record stood until 1970 when Bobby Orr beat it by 4 points, which is one of those statistical numerical anomalies that I talk about regarding Bobby Orr in the number 4. Anyway, Miles Gilbert Horton played his first game in the NHL on this day in 1950. I thought for a number of reasons it was noteworthy to mention that. This second one is a little bit out there. First of all, it starts like this. So Dave Hutchison, again, depending on how far back your hockey knowledge goes, was a crazy man, an enforcer type, but a defenseman who could play in his prime in the 3-4 hole, but he was mostly a 4-5 guy. But violent, very, very violent. He'd stick you just as soon as punch you. And on this day, in 1975, he recorded the second triple minor in NHL history. Now, he was playing for the Los Angeles Kings, and they were playing the Washington Capitals. And he ran a guy on Washington named Yvon Labre, Labre, not to be confused with Yvon Lambert of the Montreal Canadiens, later the Buffalo Sabres. But Yvon Labre actually was the first sweater number, his sweater number for him was the first number ever retired in Washington Capital history, number 7. So this particular night, Dave Hutchison, not Tim Horton, Dave Hutchison gets into it with Yvon Labre, and he runs him. He runs him from clean across the rink, charges him, boom, smokes him. Ref's arm goes up. Call him 2 minutes. Delayed penalty, right? Washington still has the puck. Labre yells something at him, so he goes back, and he cross-checks him right in the head. Gives him a 2-hander right across the coconut. And then he's skating away again. Labre says something again. He comes back, drops a glove, boom! Gives him a shot. He gets charging, high-sticking, roughing, triple minor. Second one ever in NHL history. I know you're all wondering, who got the first one, Liam? Well, that would be the famous John Ferguson on December 7th, 1967, where he got all 3 penalties against Gary Bergman of the Detroit Red Wings. And the interesting thing there, from a historical viewpoint, is John Ferguson became the assistant coach for Team Canada 72 in the Summit Series. And one of the stalwarts on the team was Gary Bergman. Of course, this was 5 years later. They had long since patched up any disagreement they might have had on the ice in 67. I digress. Back to Dave Hutchison. So here's where I'm taking a little creative liberty. That's all well and good that Dave did that. And, his stick-swinging fight with Tiger Williams in the penalty box. Just some unbelievable stuff that he did both in junior and in the pros. So my creative liberty is also scoring that night was an Ottawa native named Mike Corrigan. Went by the nickname Butch. Mike Butch Corrigan. And I wanted to say this because I know Mike scored that night for the Los Angeles Kings. And Mike played over 500 games in the NHL for the Vancouver Canucks and the Los Angeles Kings. And he did something that not one other single NHL player has ever done, nor will ever do. So this is where I'm taking my liberty, my creative liberty here, because Mike was in that game, scored in that game where Hutchison got the triple minor. Mike Corrigan is the only player in NHL history to score 20 goals or more in a season playing all 3 forward positions. So what I mean by that is he played in 1 year and scored 20 playing left wing, another year where he scored 20 playing center, and another year where he scored 20 playing right wing for the entire season. Nobody else has ever done it. No one else ever will. He's an Ottawa guy. I know him a little bit, not as well as Eddie Hebert does and some of the other, Dan Cowley, who I talked about yesterday, and some of the other guys in town. But I have met Mike before, and to me, it's one of the most unbelievable anecdotes. I can tell you that line he played on in L.A. With Juha Whiting and Bob Berry, they were called the Hotline. The Winnipeg Jets had a line that was called the Hotline as well. Might have been regarded as Hedberg Nielsen and Bobby Hull. They might have scored a little bit more, but that was in the WHA. Regardless, Mike Corrigan, the year he had his best season, in this year, in fact, this season that he scored in this game, I believe, with Los Angeles, he led the team in penalty minutes as well. He was no shrinking violet. Never be regarded as an enforcer, top 10 fighter or anything, but he didn't take any crap from anybody. And he absolutely could hold his own. And a very, very versatile, reliable two-way player who could score a bit. And I just thought that was pretty neat. So there's our short and sweet sort of this day in hockey on March 26th, and a couple of interesting anecdotes and a little bit of sideways liberties there. Our memorials tonight. Yes. Let's just bring in the star of every evening of the show, Jameson's Irish Whiskey. Got three fantastic gentlemen that we want to remember tonight, and I really appreciate the guys who don't know me. And as I said, I've only put this on Twitter so far, but the son of a man named Giovanni Amorosa. I had to look because I'm not quite familiar with all of these ones here like I am the hockey, but Giovanni Amorosa immigrated from Italy in 1959 and was a massive Jean Beliveau fan and used to sit and watch hockey with his son, I'm assuming, and possibly other family members. We didn't get into a lot of details, but he did tell me on in a couple of the tweets that it would be a hushed audience at the Amorosa homestead when Bobby Orr was carrying the puck up the ice. So even though hockey probably wasn't in his blood as he came over as a young man and cheered for the Montreal Canadiens, it sounds like, in Jean Beliveau, he had the wherewithal to understand just how good Bobby Orr was and made a point of saying that to me in the tweet. And I thought that was pretty cool. He was, according to his son, a man who didn't say a lot, but when he did, he spoke volumes and people listened. And they lost him very young, very, very young. I believe late 50s, 57, if I got the note correctly, in 1992. Far too young, my friend, far too young. We'll definitely channel his memory with the toast tonight, and I thank you very much for sending in his name. Great name, by the way, too. Giovanni Amorosa. You kidding me? It's fantastic. Once again, very honored to say we've got two local names to finish up with. Chris Ray. The irony here, of course, is that when I get to the third name, Edgar Blondin, Randy and Barry Blondin, I'm sure, could speak volumes about Chris Ray. And for anybody who's an Ottawa guy back in the day, you would know the name Chris Ray. Chris Ray was an incredible athlete, quarterback at Brookfield, as the information I got. I kind of knew a little bit about that. I knew Chris a little bit. I used to work at a store in Manotick called Four Seasons Sports. This was in the late 70s. Chris had already had a bit of a stint with the Ottawa 67s. Obviously, he was through his high school days. He was getting on with life and working still in the hockey industry. He was repping sticks. I'm not quite sure what his full occupation was. I know at one point years ago, I heard from his brother. And for those of you that remember the ice water bucket challenge, I did mine with Bobby Orr in Parry Sound, Bobby Orr's hometown. He doused me with a bucket of water. I have it on video. I'll post it sometime. And I dedicated it because that was for ALS funds research. And I dedicated it to Chris Ray's memory. So he's been gone a long time. I believe he ended up passing away from ALS, I want to say mid-80s. I met him in the late 70s. So he's been gone a long time. But hell of an athlete, tough as nails, super strong, good-looking guy. And again, just that dreaded disease that has taken so many, as we all well know, possibly some, and even in your own families who's watching this. And we'll include Chris in the toast tonight too. The third one, and this is near and dear to my heart because of his sons. I never met Edgar Blondin. He's been he's been gone a long time too. Actually, I think I may have, I think Edgar Blondin might have passed away the same time as Mr. Amorosa, if I'm not mistaken. I think they both went in 1992. But Edgar Blondin is a man I never met, but I certainly know his boys. And I think he had 5 children altogether, I believe. 4 boys and a girl. And Edgar Blondin is in the Ottawa Sports Hall of Fame. Okay? When he went in the Hall of Fame in 1986. This guy was the consummate athlete. He was a boxer. He was a fastball player. He played football. He was an outstanding hockey player. He played 11 years pro. And on his pro teams, whether he was in the British League or playing here in the Eastern Hockey League or the International Hockey League, he was either first or second in penalty minutes every single year. So his boys, if you know, especially 3 of them, Randy, Barry, and Jeff, they come by it honestly. Edgar Blondin wasn't very big, but he was tough as nails. Tough as nails. Fight the world, kick the shit out of the world, no problem. And like I said, I never met him, but I sure as heck wish I did. When you talk about Plouffe Park or Balsam Street and some of the areas of Lower Town there, that was his backyard where he grew up. The Blondins are legends around that area. And Randy and Barry were 2 of the better amateur athletes themselves. Their other brother, Jeff, much younger, takes no back seat as well. He also played a little bit with the Ottawa 67s. And I think that's a great shout out to have an opportunity to toast the memory of Edgar Blondin, whose name I've mentioned many, many times. I mean, Somerville Avenue was another one I wrote down. I'm pretty sure it means a lot to the Blondin family. So, without further ado, we'll Johnstown Jets. Edgar Blondin won a Lockhart Cup with the Johnstown Jets. That's a league championship. And I don't care where you play, when you play, or how you play. Oh, it's another big shot of whiskey tonight. Then I wanna salute anybody who did that. And I think he wore number 7, as I think Randy has pointed that out to me. So on behalf of these 3 great names tonight, Giovanni, Amorosa, Chris Ray, and the legend Edgar Blondin, and our guests of the week, our guests of the day on March the 26th. Let's salute them all. Thanks very much for watching, folks. And tomorrow, maybe we'll take some of your questions if you have any for me. G'day.